Will someone please explain why we are mutilating gourds?
It's an ancient Earth tradition for a holiday called Halloween. Jack-o'-lanterns were supposed to keep demons from entering your home.
Well, friends, we're back at it again with another episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. Almost up to the end of the 5th and final season, this one's episode 8, otherwise entitled Upper Decks. No baseball cards required. Spoilers do lie ahead, so if those are not for you, consider yourself warned. Now let's crack on with the show. This episode here seems like it's going to be a pretty divisive one, at least on release. That said, I also believe that it's going to age exceptionally well. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, basically we have 2 episodes left of this entire season, let alone the entire series, and we almost sort of kind of maybe possibly had an arc going this season, but it's one which has been so very minimally explored that when you spend an entire episode with a side quest, or at least a bunch of side quests, I think this will probably cause a good amount of frustration in people, myself somewhat included, who feel like they're wasting time when that's the one thing we don't have left with this show. Valid feelings for sure, however, I don't think that's really a fair criticism to throw at this episode in a vacuum. Once divorced of the now, I think people are going to look at this episode pretty fondly. It's a much needed exploration of the eponymous Upper Deckers, and it provides a moment to spend with many of the supporting characters for quite possibly the final time. We get mini plots following Freeman, Shax, Ransom, Billups, and T'Ana, which all eventually culminate in the main plot, if you can even call it that. And I truly feel like this was something that they've planned from the start. I think they always intended to give us something of a showcase near the end of the series with the command crew, and since this has now become the final season, I guess it's time to throw that in the mix. I suppose the best way to tackle this one is to talk about each of the main characters one by one. Let's start with Shax, who was personally my favorite aspect to this episode. I must say, though, that very early on I was pretty worried when he dismissed himself at the briefing in the start. He's barely been in this season, and when he is in the season, he almost never even has lines, so I was thinking that his story was going to end there for this episode, and thankfully, I was quite wrong. I know it's strange to say, since his story was the darkest and most tragic, but it really was probably the most interesting part here. Getting some great visualizations of his horrific time during the occupation of Bajor, seeing him fight his inner demons, which may or may not have been brought on by his death in the whole trip to the Black Mountain, having little added elements of Bajoran faith and rituals. It was all great character stuff, but also just really great action stuff to watch on screen. I absolutely loved the portrayal of Nega Shax.
As time passes, I grow stronger, while you get older and fade away.
Which I think was probably a visual choice of Nega Scott from Scott Pilgrim.
But can you defeat yourself?
Nega Scott.
However, it also very clearly reminded me of Negaduck from Darkwing Duck. At least the Negatron version, and I would definitely say the Darkwing thing was just a me connection, but they also threw in the background detail about Mariner being trapped in a painting.
We were supposed to study a calcified forest on Malman 5, but then we got trapped in a painting.
And that episode of Darkwing Duck is another one that's stuck in my head for decades now.
Can she do that? You're finished, you rotten Rembrandt rubber.
So it is conceivable that Mike McMahon or the creators behind Lower Decks are also drawing upon the same nostalgic things that are in my brain. It also appears that some people are insinuating that the painting away mission is a setup for the Lower Decks movie. I personally don't think that's the case, and if it's going to set anything up, it's probably the upcoming comic series, but it might just be a fun throwaway gag that we didn't get to see on screen. Up next, we have Dr. T'Ana and her pain problems.
Apparently some of the crew don't like my pain management.
Because you don't manage pain, I mean.
Sick people come in, healthy people go out. That should be enough.
It was a somewhat interesting side story, great to get a bit of Nurse Westlake and all of that, and it also led to one of the best lines in the whole damn episode.
That was set to kill.
So am I!
But what I find pretty interesting is the almost certainly unintentional connection to our current day world. They couldn't have possibly known all the stuff going down with just all of this on the same day the episode dropped. But do you know what else is currently happening? These fine folks here are members of the channel, something that you could also do.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe.
And don't forget to super thanks. The next little adventure we get is Billups and Meredith doing some extreme engineering.
Even if I die?
Everybody dies, but it's the engineers who really get to live.
That was pretty fun. I really like to see all of the extravagant ways that they had to try and save the ship. The algorithm golem, or whatever it was called. The Wrath of Khan Spock death callback were definitely the highlights, but I have to say that my favorite Billups-related part of this entire episode was the attempted canonical explanation as to the reason every Starfleet ship is just filled to the brim with explosive rocks.
Their non-centrosymmetry disrupts the charged leptons in the isolinear pathways of the main deflector, which then causes...
I trust you have it in hand.
So many leptons and not any crystal skulls or giant aliens in sight. Hooray to the one person who got that. Leave it in the comments down below. Big props to Charlotte Nickdow, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, for finally getting a pretty sizable role as Meredith in this episode. If these characters ever truly become a fully realized live-action crew of some sort, she's definitely someone I would love to see as a regular character in a Star Trek series, or a movie, or whatever. And last up, before we get to the captain herself, Commander Ander, Jack Ack, Ransom! This one may have been the least satisfying of all the Upper Deck plots, but it was also the one that was most directly tied into the main plot. After spending such a long time with Ransom seemingly being just a poor commander, it was nice to get a bit of clarification that it was all part of his motivation style, but outside of that, it was mostly used to forward the Bagoon story in the background while he motivated portions of Beta and Delta Shift. This is also the place that we discover not President Jaroshinyo is also not a scientist, but a sneaky little sneakster of a clicket infiltrating the ship in order to steal all of the cloaking milk from the Bagoons. And did anyone else think of V in this scene? I thought that's what they were going for, but so far I haven't seen it mentioned even once. Okay, I suppose that means we're finally up to Captain Freeman herself, along with her very own personal radar, Steve Stevens. Getting to see her duties as captain was a somewhat satisfying way to tie a lot of things together, and not just things from this show. It also helped provide more context to much of the stuff we saw Picard doing back in TNG, attending concerts, attending plays, taking part in the birth of eldritch beasts.
When my reproductive jelly started emulsifying, my first thought was...
Life forms. You precious little life forms. Where are you?
Here we go!
All kidding aside.
I really do want some It's a Life Form merch. But yeah, now it's time to talk about the Clickets taking over the ship, which was a good enough story, I suppose. Having so many pretty well-balanced subplots running together definitely kept any of them from really dragging things down too much, and as goofy as the solution was, it did fall in line with some of the over-the-top alien depictions we've seen in Trek before, just dialed up to 47. A couple of other little moments that stood out. I absolutely loved the mention of Tendi knowing more about Earth history than humans.
Is it sad that Tendi knows more of our history than we do?
Oh, yeah.
Sure, it was kind of a throwaway thing, but that really falls in line with things that we've seen Spock and maybe even Data do, where they would just pull things out of their memory banks all the time and just know more about Earth history than any of the human characters. Barnes being both evolved and de-evolved simultaneously was a fun premise in and of itself, but it works even better with the past Trek knowledge of just how often they get the concept of evolution incredibly incorrect. It's like Genesis had salamander babies. All in all, I definitely liked the episode. While it did disappoint by once again ignoring what we all thought was the season arc of Rift mysteries, I think time will be kind to this one and end up turning into a much needed exploration of and goodbye to the side characters of the series. But what did you think of this exploration of the upper decks? Let me know down below or come over to Best of Trek, Worst of Trek Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern to discuss the latest episodes and news in the world of Star Trek while also decrying what they did to my poor boy Joe Carey. That's all for this one. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, join, and do all those YouTube things. But until next time...
And scene.